Okay, hello and greetings everyone. I welcome us all to this class. And one thing that I need to emphasize is that from Professor Sonia, don't make his presentation with slides. So those who are not in the class today, I don't know, I can help it. You just have to watch the pre-recorded versions, so there is no slides for his lectures. So he is a philosophy professor at John Colbert University, Rome, and director and co-founder of the Humanism Network, and a fellow at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology, research fellow at the Auha Institute for Humanities, and a whole lot. He is editor and has written so much in humanism, transhumanism, posthumanism, philosophy, and contributed so much in his work, Homo ex machina. So I'm going to yield the mic to Professor Sonia. So he's going to um, give us a little bit about his background and then take us through his classes today. Thank you so much, Prof. I yield.
Hello, yes, great to be with you again. And I'm a philosophy professor in Rome, yes, as you rightly mentioned, and I've been dealing with these issues related to longevity, increased health span from a philosophical perspective, from a transhumanist perspective, since 1999, so more than 26 years. And and what I particularly want to highlight during today's lectures is sort of the increased relevance, political relevance of the longevity discourses and how it's closely entangled with, in particular, with the transhumanist discourses and how it has changed, how these discourses have changed in the past, just in the past 5 years basically, because so much has happened and longevity has really become come to the forefront of research, in particular also when it comes to the field of transhumanism. And so I want to, at the same time, I want to highlight sort of the relevance of cultural nuances, of different, how these reflections are being portrayed, how they're being received, how they're being dealt with in different parts of the world. And later on, also that sort of the relevance, how they're being dealt with, also plays a role concerning the central issues which we need to focus on. And the central issue which we need to focus on is really the question concerning how we deal with personalized digital data. Because in the end, it's all a matter of having access to personalized, digitized bodily data, medical data, if we actually want to realize, in order to realize sort of an increased health span. And that is something which is, and I regularly stress it, and this is really something which empirical studies have confirmed. That's what most people are interested in. There's an excellent study by psychologists from the United States, and they basically asked participants, if you were 120 years old, if you're in full health, would you want to continue living? And the response was a clear yes by about 80% of the participants. So we've got clear indication that maybe the one thing which most people identify with a flourishing life is an increased health span. And in order to realize that nowadays, sort of the interface between digital data, AI, and increasing the health span by means of biotechnologies, that's the most important element, basically, when it comes to this part of research. But a lot has happened in the past 5 years, and I want to highlight which effects, which consequences this has concerning this field of study. Sinclair speaks of restoring epigenetic information. O'Neill moves from managing Thiel's biotech philanthropy to managing US health policy. And all of these are basically sort of carbon-based enhancement projects. They used to be part of a biohacker culture, very niche culture. And in the meantime, they've moved into the machinery of the state. Elon Musk funds AI safety research at Oxford. Putin muses about organ replacement on a hot mic in Beijing. Various forms of transhumanism are no longer merely philosophical categories. And I used to use silicon-based and carbon-based transhumanism as categories to organize my reflections in a book, We've Always Been Cyborgs, which is a book in which I particularly stress the relevance of the use of personalized digital data for increasing one's health span. Nowadays, so it moved from a philosophical project towards something which political and economic elites seek to reorganize the world. And I'm going to talk about a couple of central chronologies of what has happened in the past couple of years. But in the meantime, it's clear the cyborg concision of which, when I say we as human beings have always been cyborgs, it was never a speculative future reserved for philosophers, science fiction authors. It's a description what human beings already are and have always been becoming. What has changed in the most recent past is not the plausibility of the claim, but now it has the power to act on central political levels. But one needs to distinguish various, cultural regions in the world. There's a close connection between transhumanism and longevity. On the one hand, transhumanists focus on AI. On the other hand, on the relevance of an increased health span. What is really important is the interconnection between these two. And both have become politically, culturally, and scientifically relevant. Two Silicon Valley entrepreneurs from the so-called PayPal mafia, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, made particular interpretations of these developments politically and culturally visible. Both are active concerning transhumanism, longevity projects. Their affirmation of transhumanism is different. Peter Thiel has explicitly discussed his support for transhumanism in a widely circulated interview published in The Futurist, and had long been particularly influenced by ideas of Aubrey de Grey, who received his doctorate from Cambridge University. His main focus is in the increase of health span. Elon Musk, on the other hand, has supported transhumanist thinking of some Oxford scholars. He endorsed the book Superintelligence. In cooperation with the Open Philanthropy Project, he funded 1 million grants through the Future of Life Institute to Oxford's Future of Humanity Institute. And he regularly defends ideas, transhumanist ideas like simulation hypothesis in public events. His main focus are existential risks, like the risk of humanity being wiped out by AI. But nowadays, he's also moving into the longevity more and more, in particular with David Sinclair. Those ideas have gained a lot of further public, political, as well as academic recognition, and their association with transhumanism is noted in academic, political, as well as public discourses, in particular in the United States. In the rest of the world, there's an increasing amount of scholarly literature on this connection since 2022. But even here, the impact is still rather moderate of the term transhumanism. In public exchanges outside of the United States, the relevance of transhumanism remains extremely low or fairly low, even though the various topics which go along with transhumanism are increasingly being discussed in all parts of the world. Among leading thinkers, politicians, and intellectuals, both in Russia, the United States, and the Vatican, however, the term transhumanism, closely connected with the longevity, has gained an enormous amount of relevance since 2022. In particular, an important moment for AI was November the 13th, 2022, which is called the ChatGPT moment. AI has been discussed in academic circles for a long time, but with the public release of ChatGPT on the 13th of November 2022, something important changed. AI has become a central topic in political circles, in academia, and in public discourses. It also became relevant in the booming field of longevity research. We haven't reached, and that's an interesting question. Will it also be possible to have like a ChatGPT moment, like a longevity moment? Because, the same reflections also apply to longevity research. Another important period of time was basically was March 25 to May 25, 2023, Tuzala in Montenegro. Former recipient of a Thiel Fellowship and founder of Ethereum, Vitalik Buterin, supports the realization of a pop-up city entitled Tuzala, which brings together longevity, AI, crypto, decentralized science, and alternative governance circles. In the US, then, November the 5th, 2024, Trump got reelected. In January 20th, 2025, Trump begins his second presidency. Trump is connected to supporters of transhumanism like Thiel and Musk and longevity, but also of critics and enemies of transhumanism like Steve Bannon. January the 1st, 2025, Don't Die, The Man Who Wants to Live Forever, released on Netflix. That was extremely important for really presenting longevity to a really big audience all around the world. Suddenly all of my students became aware of longevity. Brian Johnson's experimental gene therapy in Prospera Roatan was undertaken in September 2023. And thus, radical longevity moves towards experimental gene therapy outside of the conventional US regulatory system. With the release of his documentary, Radical Longevity and Biohacking Enter Mass Popular Culture in 2025. An important date was also June the 9th, 2025, when Jim O'Neill was sworn in as Deputy Secretary of U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and on February 13, 2026, he leaves his HHS leadership position amid a major restructuring. That is important in particular for longevity. The influential Peter Thiel Fellowship was established in cooperation with Jim O'Neill in 2010, who was also the CEO of the Thiel Foundation, this Jim O'Neill, from 2009 to 2012. From October 2019 until July 2021, Jim O'Neill was the CEO of the SENS Research Foundation, which is obviously associated with Aubrey de Grey's works. And since June 2025, he has been actively relevant for US politics as Deputy Secretary of HHS. So suddenly, someone who was like supporting Peter Thiel in his longevity endeavors have moved into like being the Vice Secretary of Health in the United States. A lot has happened also in between 2025 and 2026 concerning AI as an instrument for controlling biological aging. The entrepreneur Alex Savaronkov has been particularly important in this development, using AI for drug discovery, biological age prediction, and the identification of intervention that might restore biological function. Harvard geneticist David Sinclair has similarly emphasized the potential of AI to accelerate research into biological agents and cellular reprogramming, increasingly presenting aging as a potentially reversible biological process. Peter Diamandis has connected these developments to the broader entrepreneurial ecosystem of exponential technologies, most visibly through the 101 million X Prize health span. In January this year, Elon Musk publicly described aging as potentially, I quote, very solvable. David Sinclair supported Musk's judgment on X, presented his vision of age reversal at the World Government Summit in February 2026, and in April discussed AI, rejuvenation, and the emerging clinical translation of epigenetic reprogramming with Peter Diamandis. In June 2026, Life Biosciences, a company associated with Sinclair, entered human clinical trials with ER100, making an important transition from preclinical research toward human intervention aimed at restoring age-related biological function. AI and biotechnologies aimed at increasing human health span have become the most active fields of transhumanism. And these fields have also been booming outside of the United States, where selected endeavors in Russia and China are particularly noteworthy. September the 3rd, 2025, Putin and Xi Jinping discuss longevity and immortality. During the 80th anniversary military parade in Beijing, a hot microphone captures Putin discussing biotechnology, organ replacement, and the possibility of dramatically extending human life, whereby Xi responds that some predict humans live to 150 years during the century. Putin's fascination with longevity has long been known. His daughter, Maria Vorontsova, an endocrinologist and genetics researcher, is associated with the Russian state genetics and longevity research infrastructure too. Research priorities in Russia include genetics, bioprinting, xenotransplantation, and regenerative medicine, with the broader objective of extending healthy human life. Thus, radical longevity enters the public discourse at the highest political level in Russia and in China, without either leader adopting the term transhumanism. There are anti-transhumanism and anti-longevity movements. At the same time, increasingly influential intellectual and political movements have developed explicit critiques of transhumanism, longevity. Some are radically conservative and traditionalist, others criticize these movements from religious, ecological, communitarian, or posthumanist perspectives. 2018, Steve Bannon, the former advisor of Trump, and Alexander Dugin meet in Rome to discuss traditionalism. 2021, Alexander Dugin refers to transhumanism as an idea of the devil. The Patriarch of Moscow, Kirill I, has often mentioned the dangers related to these terms. 2023, Steve Bannon mentions in the foreword of the anti-transhumanist Dark Aeon that transhumanism is the world's most dangerous idea whose practice is even worse than the theory. 2024, April 29, in an interview with Tucker Carlson, Dugin explicitly groups transhumanism, posthumanism, singularity, artificial intelligence together as developments arising from Western liberalism. 2025, December 10th, Pope Leo XIV explicitly addresses the transhumanist scenario and criticizes aspirations towards technologically produced earthly immortality. And he talks both about immortality as well as about increasing the lifespan, which is really interesting because, I mean, you know, the Pope is like the religious leader of an enormous amount of people. So he explicitly criticizes these attitudes. 2026, on the May 15th, the day the encyclical was signed. In his encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, Pope Leo XIV gives this most substantial, explicitly critical treatment of AI, transhumanism, posthumanism, and so on. The above chronology reveals that in the past couple of years, political, religious, and intellectual leaders in Russia, the United States, the Vatican have clearly attributed an enormous importance to these terms, in particular as it's practiced in the United States, with a focus on AI and longevity. And these two topics have also gained an enormous amount of attention in other parts of the world, both in the wider public as well as in academia. Thereby, transhumanism has received more attention by scholars all over the world. However, the academic impact still remains moderate in comparison to the United States, where transhumanism, longevity, AI, and singularity are central issues. The situation is different when it comes to the topics of AI and longevity in particular. They are being discussed in the wider public all over the world, but without necessarily considering the theoretical background in transhumanism. In some geographical regions, these topics have been related to different types of cultural movements. In continental Europe, the concept of transhumanism, posthumanism, and technological humanism are reflected upon in universities. Recently, Eurotranshumanism concept I developed in 2022, which I developed further in a monograph which came out this year, has gained quite a bit of attention. In China, the term Sino-futurism, as well as Chinese transhumanism, have come up in academics exchanges. Japan has focused particularly on posthumanism, cyborgism, and technoculture, but less on transhumanism. Thereby needs to be noted that posthumanism is a particular multifaceted concept which in most circumstances, but not in all of them, refers to a cultural movement which has grown out of continental European postmodernism and must not be mixed up with transhumanism. In South Korea, transhumanist ideas are increasingly discussed through human enhancement, posthumanism, AI, human convergence, biotechnology, and digital humans rather than solely under the level of transhumanism. Academically, Korean philosophy and ethics engage explicitly with transhumanism and posthumanism, particularly regarding AI, human enhancement, human dignity, and the technological transformation of human nature. The Journal of Posthuman Studies, which I established in cooperation with James Hughes from the United States, with Sang-Yu Shin from Eva Women's University in Seoul, became a big issue. Nowadays, it's coming out with Penn State University Press. Nowadays, John Cabot University Rome also serves as an academic partner. It's important to always distinguish. All the cultural nuances need to be taken into consideration. For example, in Eastern Asia, South Korea, Japan, China, as the cultural roots differ significantly in these countries. This too could be kept obviously in mind when talking about Africa, as the continent is enormously vast and extraordinarily diverse. And cultural and historical religions, as well as political situations, must always be taken into consideration. It needs to be noted that there have been quite a few significant transhumanist longevity endeavors in Nigeria and South Africa. The following academic journal is particularly noteworthy. There's the journal Etsumezu, African Perspective in Logic, Transhumanism and AI Ethics. Afrofuturism, obviously Afrolongevity, and Ubuntu transhumanism are related concepts which have been employed in various parts in Africa to discuss related topics. In Latin America, posthumanism and decolonial futures are particularly prominent, and in the Gulf world, this applies to the concept of Arab futurism and Gulf futurism, but transhumanism has also been emerging in a separate cultural approach in recent years. Since 2022, this development has become increasingly visible. Transhumanism, longevity has not simply expanded geographically. Elements of these approaches are being discussed in several cultural movements all over the world. Many of them differ significantly from transhumanism. Xenofuturism, Afrofuturism, Afrolongevity, Ubuntu transhumanism, Latin American decolonial posthumanism, and Eurotranshumanism. The future of transhumanism may therefore not be a universal philosophical approach, but a plurality of culturally situated projects concerning the transformation of the human. Obviously, longevity, increasing the health span, that's something which is widely being shared. However, it must also be noted that transhumanist ideas have become embedded in ordinary political agendas all over the world without politicians identifying themselves as transhumanists or as something else. Japan has always had, for example, has always had an enormously refined way of tackling the impact of emerging technologies. Japan did not need transhumanism to imagine the cyborg. It had already imagined it and continues to, with a cultural density that Western discourse only caught up with decades later. From Tetsuwan Atomo post-war fantasy of the machine child socially treated as a human, through Mamoru Oshio Ghost in a Shell, its interrogation of where the ghost ends and the shell begins, to the state-sponsored vision of Society 5.0, in which the integration of cyberspace and physical space has become an explicitly national policy, in particular focusing also on the issue of health. Japan's popular and political imagination has long treated the boundary between the organic and the technological as porous rather than catastrophic. And this is in fact very close to the non-essentialist anthropology of my book, of Eurotranshumanist approach. We've always been the cyborgs. The idea that reason, personal than the human itself, are emergent achievements of genetic and cultural evolution rather than fixed essences that technology threatens from outside. This also comes up in various Ubuntu understandings. On the other hand, where much of the Anglo-American discourse chronicled below still frames AI and biotechnology as an external force to be feared, which, for example, Pope Leo XIV and cyclicals do in their own register. Japanese culture has for over half a century supplied its readers with a vocabulary for treating enhancement as continuous with rather than opposed to and what it means to be human. I can see that in various Ubuntu approaches to Ubuntu transhumanism as well. In that sense, so it arrives, these reflections don't arrive in the various cultures. They don't just arrive as an import of some foreign anxieties, but as a philosophical companion to an imaginary that many readers in the various cultures have already recognized as their own. But the concepts being used in the various parts of the world have been different ones. So one always, if one starts to create a resonance, if one starts to realize, one enters into a discourse and we'll realize, well, there's some constructive resonances or then deconstructive resonances. But I think it's always important to always, so on the one hand, there's the issue, so there seems to be a global phenomena that basically says living longer healthily is something which most people all over the world regard as central. So there are studies which basically say 80% identify an increased health span with a better quality of life. On the other hand, there are very different approaches, as we've seen, how these issues are tackled within Russia, in China, in Japan, in the United States, in various places, in continental Europe. Continental Europe is very different from the United Kingdom. And obviously, and also in various parts of Africa. So it's difficult. One needs to be aware whether it's Nigeria or South Africa or whether the situation is in Botswana. And which words are being used for tackling these discourses. One of the issues which has become extremely clear, so the importance of increasing the health span and the relevance for AI in doing so. And if we want to use AI, then we need to take if we want to use AI, then we need to take into consideration, basically, we need to get a lot of digital data, personalized digital data concerning our bodies. And the question is, how can this be done best? Because in order to have a functioning AI, we need a functioning AI in order to realize the goal of increasing the health span. However, differences matter. And there is some physiological difference. There are differences concerning the geographical nature of where one lives, whether it's cold, whether it's hot, whether it's warm, whether it's there are some diseases which only turn up in the Mediterranean. There are some, one needs to take the food into consideration. One needs to take the amount of sunshine into consideration, the genetic makeup, and all of that matters in order to find correlations between genetic information and the goal of increasing one's health span. How is now the collection of digital data being dealt with? So we've got, in various cultures, we have various different means for dealing with the collection of digital data. But in the end, that's a central aspect for basically realizing the goal of increasing the health span. In the United States, it's a libertarian country. So it's very easy for big companies to basically collect the data, sell the data, exchange data, and so on. In Europe, we've got the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation. So there's an enormous focus on privacy. A comprehensive collection of personalized digital data, and this includes medical data, is enormously difficult. And that's an enormous challenge for longevity research in the European context. The situation is, again, very different in China. In China, basically all the digital data which are being produced in China and which are collected by the various companies in China, the company have the legal obligation to share the data with the Chinese government. So as a consequence, The Chinese government has got the legal right to get hold of all the, health-related personalized digital data from within China, but also from without China. If you use like Alibaba, if you use Huawei, if you use TikTok, and so many people use TikTok. So all the information, so they have a very efficient way of collecting personalized digital data. So, and on that basis, the possibilities of making research concerning increasing the health span is enormously efficient, and probably even more efficient than in the United States. It needs to be noted that already there are more double-blind peer-reviewed papers being published in China than there are in the United States. Europe is already out of the game because of the strong regulations we have concerning the GDPR, because of the high value of privacy. There is no way of basically keeping up with the research which is being undertaken in the States and China. And that is an enormous possibility which is actually there for Afrolongevity to take place. Now, the goal needs to be to create an alliance within various African countries who are interested in doing so, and rendering it some way, trying to collect as much information, bodily information, physiological information, psychological information, genetic information as possible. And in this way, it is also possible. So in this way, on the one hand, one can be at the move to the forefront of longevity research, but in particular, one can also focus on maybe some issues in for example, what has come out in sort of research, that there's an enormous difference when we talk about how do drugs affect men and how do drugs affect women. There's a significant difference because in research men have been used and suddenly the dosages don't work for women, and the same applies to people living in different parts of the world. With some different sensitivities to different drugs. So, and these differences need to be taken into consideration. So, if the research was mostly done in India, then it might not apply to someone in Botswana. And it might, there are certain things which apply on a general human level, but there are other things which are really particular to people from a certain part of the world. And as a consequence, the goal needs to be, in order to promote an increased health span, to basically realize an alliance between various nation states in Africa, to try to realize, to put Afro-longevity on a political agenda. And if you want to put it on a political agenda, that also means you would have to establish a way of comprehensively collecting digitized data, and comprehensively collecting digitized data. That might be, that might actually be a way of realizing several goals at the same time. It could at least lead to an enormous boost of longevity research in the countries which agreed to participate in this research. At the same time, it could promote the health span in the various countries too. What needs to be undertaken is basically legal structures need to be realized, which make the collection of personalized digital data possible. So on the one hand, there is an digital infrastructure. In the digital infrastructure, we need to get upgraded as human beings further. And get upgraded as human beings further means the best way to do so, and that's something I've been suggesting, for a long period of time. We need to do the same as predictive maintenance of health. What is predictive maintenance of health? So predictive maintenance works very efficiently in planes. We've got sensors in all parts of the planes. And basically these sensors are being put into an AI, and they find out, so, given certain measures, there's a high likelihood that a specific part of the engine will become dysfunctional within the next half year. And if this is the case, there might only be like a 20% chance of one part of the engine becoming dysfunctional in the next 6 months. So it's not a very big risk. However, you don't want the engine to become dysfunctional. So as a consequence, engineers will replace that part of the engine, so everything goes fine. There's no worries. There are no worries at all for the engine to become dysfunctional. As a consequence, we could do the same thing for human health. And for human health, that basically means we have sensors in all parts of the body. We need to have RFID chips. We need to have RFID chips as part of our bodies. We need to have watches and rings which analyze our biometric data. They are connected to the smartphone. All of these data are being transmitted, are being collected somewhere. In order to understand the correlation between external factors, bodily factors, genetic factors, behavioral factors. And as a consequence, we get a lot of different insights. Some of them apply to all humans. Some of them apply to certain people from a certain region. Some of them apply to certain people with, only men, some only to women. But we find out all of these particularities. And as a consequence, that is something extremely relevant, because these data is something, the big pharma, big industries are extremely interested in all over the world. So establishing such a digital and AI enhanced infrastructure in the countries which participate in such Afrolongevity project, they could sell the data then to other companies. They could use the data for research in order to get insights, in order to realize how to actually to implement and how to live longer healthily. And so the goal would have to be basically, and that's so America is libertarian, China is authoritarian. In many places where Ubuntu is present, it's more communitarian structures. So there it might be easier to establish something which is in the interest of the community. And to say, let's get together. We need to share the data. We need to share the data in order to increase the likelihood of us, living longer and healthier lives. But at the same time, so we can benefit ourselves in living longer and healthier lives, but at the same time, we can sell the data to companies, international pharmaceutical companies, and thus generate money in order to also, which also increases the economic well-being. So what I was trying to say is, what I was trying to show as part of this lecture is, a lot has happened in the past, in the past 5 years, from the various parts. So firstly, there's a strong correlation between transhumanism and longevity, striving for immortality. What used to be a biohacker community, what used to be part of some niche groups, has really now reached a wider audience. People, politicians in China, Russia, and the States are taking it seriously. So it's moved into a different field of attention. But that means we also, in order to promote the research, we need to take that element seriously. There are very clever ways of collecting personalized digital data, and that's essential for promoting an increased health span. There are clever ways, in particular in China. US is not doing well. US is doing fairly well. Europe is really terrible at what doing so. So it would be in the interest to form an alliance of various African countries to realize a longevity alliance where basically personalized digital data gets collected in order to make research, in order to collect data concerning how an increased health span can be promoted, by taking a cultural situation into consideration, but at the same time by getting insights concerning a wider human impact, and thus these same data can also be sold to international pharmaceutical companies in order to increase the economic well-being. But all of these issues, be it transhumanism, be it longevity, be it xenofuturism, various types of futurism, we always need to take the cultural background, the various ways of how different cultures talk about these issues into consideration. We need to take into consideration some issues which apply to all humans, and otherwise some which might only apply, to a certain group of humans. And but in order to do so, the central factor is the collection of personalized digital data, and that needs to be realized. But that also provides Afrolongevity with a wonderful project for generating and being part of an increasingly flourishing future of with an increased health span for everyone. So thanks a lot for all your attention. I'm looking forward to our further exchanges. So I hope we can take some questions, get into discourse. I'm wondering whether these reflections um, is a resonance with you, making sense to you, and some issues which need some further clarification, please tell me to do so. I think it's an enormous potential, actually. Afro-Longevity is a wonderful project. It provides an enormous potential for increasing the health span all over the world, but in particular also provides sort of an alliance of people who really, of countries, which get together to also promote not only the increased health span, but also to promote a better economic well-being, plus like the possibility of realizing a universal healthcare system in these countries, and that would be sort of the best possible goal, which I think the best issue for improving the qualities of lives in the participating countries.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Sonia. I have to sincerely appreciate your selfless sacrifices that you make whenever we call on you. You've always been there, but I really want to ask the question that regards to the data harvest. That's your people. Let me permit me to use the funny word of expression. The Europeans and Americans, why are they so interested in African data mining? And how does um, the data mining influence the health policy in Africa? And what is in your first lecture, you said something that I was expecting that you touch base on the politics of health economics, the politics of health economics, how the first world countries, also some of what do they call it again? The something superior culture, how they try to undermine on the developing country and the policies they play to achieve that. Because Africans need to know the truth behind this and how literature is being used also as um what do we call it again? There is a name for a systemic racism. There is a systemic racism at the forefront of health data collections and all that. Please, I would like you to address that issue. You did touch base on that in the first lectures. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Oh, no, you're right. I wanted to present a different angle this time, in particular, highlighting sort of really what has happened on a political level, on a cultural level with respect to these developments. I think so. Um, why is so? We need to personalize digital data is enormously relevant. We need we need real data from human beings. Some say, because some scientists claim in order to find correlations between genes, between diseases and traits, health-related traits, it might be sufficient to generate artificial data. We use artificial data in order to make research concerning increasing the health span. However, this does not work. This is really problematic because artificial data might create information maybe concerning how you could get a melanoma on Mars, on the planet Mars. It might generate provide data with what happens if you're like flying in space for a couple of 100 years. But all of this information is absolutely unuseful. It has no practical relevance. So if we want to, and we want to make things relevant, we want to create research, we want to create drugs, we want to create medicine, therapies, we want to increase the health span of the people who are actually living and alive. So that's why artificial data cannot do the job. And there are many. The thing is, so what is needed is like a comprehensive collection of personalized digital data of humans. And many of the diseases, many of the struggles are such that they actually apply to humans all over the world. And this is something which always, culture is one aspect, but like there is humanity, and we share like more than 99% of our genes with each other. But so basically, the findings, if personalized digital data gets collected in Nigeria and in Botswana, this is information which also applies to people in Kenya, in Ethiopia, Morocco, and in Germany, in Russia, and so on. So these digital data is enormously relevant for companies all over the world. There's some peculiarities which only apply to people from a certain region. So that also and the more data people from the region have, basically, the better it is for the people in a certain part of Mozambique to find that information, because then they can be treated in the best manner possible. Yeah, but these like peculiarities, they are also of interest in the global pharmaceutical companies. Because they are also of interest if we know that certain genes maybe are just relevant for people in a certain region, then these are not insights which apply to people in Chile or in Argentina. So we can distinguish from what applies in certain region with respect to genes from other insights, and most of the insights apply to people all over the world. And that is the relevance why there's an enormous interest from pharmaceutical companies in basically collecting as much personalized digital data as possible. Lifestyle, psychology, physiology, medical data, and so on. So, and now the thing is, why could that be particularly beneficial for countries which now try to implement, like, let's say, Afrolongevity in their national goals? The issue is then one needs to make sure that basically the personalized digital data, one needs to realize these data are the new gold, are the new oil, they are the new diamonds, they are enormously precious. So don't share so easily. Any nation, any unity, any institution needs to try to really, make the best in their own interest. And basically, if you've got an alliance of like several countries in southern parts of Africa, then these digital data gets collected there. And then you say, the pharmaceutical companies want them, but say, no, we don't give them so easily. You need to pay us really well, and then they're willing to share the data. Then we're willing to give away the data. And the possibility now, and that is, I think, something which Afrolongevity could actually promote enormously. You say you enable a structure, a digital data center, in which, like, a lot of digital personalized medical data, physiological data get collected, but you make it really difficult for companies and so on to get hold of these data. And this is a way, so the countries benefit themselves because they can help their citizens to provide them with the best health care, with the best treatment, with the best way to increasing the health span. On the other hand, it's a wonderful way of generating additional economic flourishing by selling the data to big pharmaceutical companies, and permanently new data being produced. So could be like it could be like an abonnement. If the pharmaceutical companies want the companies from the next month and the month after, they need to pay every month new and new data, because all the data is always new. There are permanently changes in sort of our physiological makeup, in the surroundings, and these are relevant for dealing with health issues. So and in this way, one needs to rethink and make it difficult to share the data. Treat personalized data as enormous, precious, diamonds, oil, gold. And that's a way of helping the citizens of the countries who participate in it. But at the same time, it helps us the economic well-being in these countries. And if you realize economic well-being in the countries, then the countries can afford a universal healthcare system. And with a universal healthcare system, basically, an increased average health span can be generated. And this has already occurred. This has already increased worldwide significantly in the past 200 years. But obviously, with a personalized treatment system and data, that could be increased even more and even further. Cherish, protect your personalized digital medical and physiological data, and then that generates well-being, but also economic well-being.
Thank you so much, Prof. Let's take, we have two more questions here. Dr. Nyok, please ask your question. After that, we take the question from Dr. Kofi.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Carlo.
Hello.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Sogna. I hope I pronounced it correctly.
Perfectly.
Okay. Thank you for your lecture. While you were doing your presentation, something kept on running through my mind, which is the subject of ethics. And you did not, it seems to me, I don't know whether I'm wrong, but it seems to me that you did not hammer so much on the ethics, especially when you are not talking about collecting personalized, digitized data. And so even when you were responding to the first question, the most I heard you said was that you try as much as possible to protect the data, because it is a new gold, it's precious. And when you want to sell it, which is beginning to have implications for capitalism, you sell it very costly because of the value of that particular data. And so if we can get, if an Afro-longevity movement can go about collating personalized, digitized data and guard that data like the new oil and sell it to the highest bidder, immediately it gets into the hands of the highest bidder. It is left to the whims and caprices of that particular buyer because it becomes their own property. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think all of the data that has been collected from Africans using tech platforms that are not indigenous to Africans. None. We do not have any that we've created. All are created by Westerners. And the use of the data, the manipulation of our data has not been to the ultimate interest of Africans, of Nigerians, of South Africans, of Botswanians. So what is the guarantee? Since you've not talked about the ethical dimension, of this personalized digitized data? What is the guarantee that if Afrolongevity begins to consider getting personalized digitized data, medical data, physiological data, psychological data for health reasons, and then it gets into the hands of a deep pocket? What is the guarantee that it will not be used against Africans? Thank you very much. That's my question.
Excellent question. Excellent question. Yeah, no, this is so the risk of abuse is enormous, and I agree with you. I agree with your worries in that respect. Um, so if the data and that doesn't only apply, let's say, to big pharmaceutical companies, that could whoever has initial access to the digital data within the nation, sort of, and the nation state would initially, maybe it's several nations getting collected, but some people would have prime access to the data. And if we've got like corrupt politicians in that country, and there, the data could be abused against the human beings whose data they've taken away. There's an enormous risk associated with that, and that's why I'm extremely grateful for your question. So what needs to be done? What needs to be done is sort of it needs to be guaranteed that the data gets protected really well from abuse. On the other hand, without the data is fundamental for making the research in the field of, dealing with diseases, increasing the health span. So there's a practical necessity. It is like printing money. It is like printing gold. It is the relevance, but it's not only financial relevance. The relevance is probably, so it is financial, but it is probably also, it is scientific relevance. It is medical relevance. So if a nation has got access to this personalized digital data, then the country, the scientists in the country definitely would be the first, who should be granted with the right of access, so that, innovation can be realized in Nigeria, maybe in an Afrolongevity alliance. Then like the local producers, the local researchers, the local universities would have to be granted direct access to doing the research, and in that way, it could directly be applied to the local communities. But one always needs to make sure that basically, because there is a lot of one needs to see one's own personalized bodily digital data as taxes. And if you pay taxes because you want to get something from the government, you want to get something like a universal healthcare system, and the more taxes you pay, the more information you share, the better the healthcare system has to be, and it has to apply to everyone in the country. And then you were wondering, in addition, but if it gets sold to like an international pharmaceutical company, how can we make sure that like the locals can benefit from the research? That's a matter of a contract. That's a matter of, you need to make sure, well, we're selling the data, and that's needs to be part of the longevity endeavors. So we share the data, but the data must always be used such that it's in the interest of the people who give away the data. That must be part of any of the contracts. So when you share the data, maybe it's to a big company who developed vaccines against HIV, then basically the result, if they develop a successful HIV treatment, then basically it must be shared to the ones on whose data basically the research is founded. If they're making research on measles, if they're making research on influenza, the same must apply. So it is a matter of of realizing the importance of the data and the risks associated with it. And you're right. I mean, I didn't initially talk. I've written a lot about like the morality of data sharing or the morality of selling data, and I'm aware, and I'm afraid of these suggestions myself. You know, and you're perfectly right. The risk of abuse is enormous. You just need a certain group of corrupt leaders, and suddenly it could really be used. The data could be used against you, against the civilization, against the people. But that's a matter of getting together. That's a matter of organizations like Afrolongevity standing up. No, we stand up. We fight the ones who are trying to exploit us. We fight the ones who don't wish to share the money, the finances gained on the basis of the data. It always needs to be guaranteed. It's in our interest. It's in the interest of the democracy. So in the same way as in a democracy, we pay taxes for something which is widely in our interest, this is what should be done with personalized digital data. And that's why I think we generate more data by having chips in our bodies, giving away our gene information, genetic information, gene analysis. But as a consequence, we also demand it needs to be guaranteed that the information, the data is not being used against the citizens. Not only that, but that the results of the research are always such that they're in the interest of the citizens. The problem is focusing on privacy, not giving away, is a way to getting rid of the risks as well. But without the risk, you cannot achieve the benefits either. One example, BioNTech. They've moved away from making research, from COVID now to cancer research. But like in the European Union, the regulations concerning the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is enormously high. As a consequence, they've closed down many institutions in Germany, and they've moved to the United Kingdom. They've opened up like 30 institutions in the United Kingdom because there they managed to get hold of the data in order to make the relevance against cancer. Cancer research is enormously important. You could say, this is exactly where an Afrolongevity alliance of various countries could come in and say, look, we provide the data. We allow you to make the research concerning cancer, but as a consequence, we only share the data if we are the ones who, always firstly benefit from the outcomes, but we also benefit from the finances. So that's a matter of negotiation. So because obviously whoever gives away data has to face an enormous risk of being exploited by the ones who have the data. So there's a certain fundamental rights associated with the data, that you pay the data as taxes, but as a consequence, you must never be exploited, but you must benefit from the results of that research. So excellent question.
Okay, Dr. Nancy.
Yeah, thank you, Prof, for the excellent talk or lecture. But I was also concerned about the safety of the data, because I am a biotechnologist and I know that these things can get out of our hands. So should we collect these biodata and give it to them? Though they have a way of coming to help us. Once we sell it, we are also giving them the opportunity to use it for what they want. And any biotechnologist knows that there is also the possibility of knocking out some beneficial genes based on what they use the data for. So supposing it gets into the hands of a big pharma and they decide to do something for us for cancer, and they are also able to put in something that could knock out some beneficial genes, like genes that could make our males prolific or make both the male and female gametes come out with strong offspring, then we are doomed. So I was thinking that the correlation doesn't have to match with that of the whole world. We should decentralize it and make it continental, or even we try to make it a quarter of a continent at a time. That can easily be controlled, and we don't have to let it out to another continent because we can't trust them. That was my problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. I share your worries enormous. I mean, I share your worries, and I'm scared of the suggestions I'm making myself. Um, the thing is, if we take seriously the notion that data are the new oil, that data are, like diamonds and gold, then basically not sharing or not using the data is like it's undermining our most fundamental interests. The question is, we need to protect our data enormously well. And the best way to do so would be to realize, well, firstly, we need personalized data, because in the ideal case, you have, you analyze someone's genes at birth, you implant various chips in the person's body, and then you basically follow the traces of that person's lifestyle from 5, 10-year-old, 15, 20-year-old up until, when they're in their old age. And that's so basically you look at the interaction, that the correlations between behavior, lifestyle, wear, sun, diseases, genes, and the various interrelations between all of these factors. And that is the reason why sort of the personalized digital data are needed. And that's also the reason why, and with each new human, we find new correlations. And that's why, it's not a one-time sell for a big pharmaceutical company. The pharmaceutical company, if they manage to get hold of the information of someone like at the beginning for 5 years, then it would be more in the interest to have their data in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. So it is like a subscription. So you get like the daily updates from the person over the period of the entire lifespan. Of course, you're so right. The benefit, the risks are enormous, which go along with that. So we need to implement a certain type of measures which reduce the risk of abuse. One of the possibilities would be that one could guarantee that primarily algorithms deal with the digitized data. So the less humans directly have access to personalized digital data, then sort of a certain amount of risk get reduced. So you could always say an insurance company could go, look, your family has, women in your family have a high risk of breast cancer. We know that you've got the breast cancer gene. So we could share that with your next company, with your future employer. How much do you give us in order for us not to share the information with the company? That is just one example of a risk. And that's the risk we take when we give away our personalized digital data. So as a consequence, it is central to making sure that the data, gets very well protected. And that in the ideal case, hardly any human has direct access to the access to the data. But at the most time, algorithms are being used for the processing of the data. And then it is up to the group who basically allow the collection of the data. What do we want to sell it for? Do we want to sell it for military purposes, or do we only want to sell it for cancer research purposes? Do we want to sell it for vaccinations or also for like infertility treatments? So that's a matter of what the people, what one always needs to discuss, and one needs to make sure that it is goals which we all share, which sort of the institution shares that they're made, and that the data is being handled in a sensitive manner. I don't think it is a one-off sell. So once the data is gone, they won't use any more data. Because the situation is changing, the cultural situation, the environmental situation is changing. So all new information is relevant. The more particular, the more specific information we have is definitely relevant, because there are new diseases which come up. So one way, we need to protect the personalized digital data extremely well. Probably only allow algorithmic treatment access to the personalized data, at least try to reduce the human access to this personalized digital data. However, not giving away your digital data is not a proper option. Why not? And this is why I'm so strong on being in favor of a comprehensive analysis of personalized digital data. If we don't do it, basically, we don't have a solid basis for finding out all of these correlations concerning how to treat with diseases, preventative medicines, vaccinations, and so on. That's the best way of basically dealing with health issues, and for significantly increasing the health span. Secondly, it's enormously financially relevant. And as a consequence, it generates a lot of input. And with the finances, it is. But one needs to make sure that the finances which come into the institution, which have the right to gather this information, that they are being spent in a democratic manner. That basically, that a better universal healthcare system gets established, and that the risk of abuse gets reduced. Unfortunately, there's always the risk of abuse. If, like, anyone who has access to the data says, no, look, I want to create a totalitarian regime, I want to become a new dictator, that's an enormous risk. I want to sell it to a pharmaceutical company, I want to sell it to a future employer. That's an enormous risk. But when such things happen, then that's a risk which we cannot stop. That's a risk which is always there, which goes along with allowing the collecting of digital data. But then we need to step out. We need to get together as a group, as citizens, as a political institution, say we don't allow that to happen. That just the minor elite basically abuses our digital data and uses it against us. That's when we need to step up and get out, and we need to fight for our data, because the data is enormously helpful. The issue is, if we don't allow the comprehensive collection of digital data, we will not get the benefits either. And the benefits are enormously for increasing our lifespan, our health span, for increasing our financial well-being, and for financing a universal healthcare system. And these need to be the goals, and we need to take some risk. And if others try to undermine our interests, we need to stand up for them and basically guarantee that exploitation, abuse doesn't occur. But I share your concern. The risks actually which go along with the comprehensive data collection are enormous. But not allowing it is not the better option, basically.
Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. That was really comprehensive. I really thank you for your time and for your efforts in ensuring that we have enormous information with regards to what is happening today, health data and the politics. I have to appeal that you help us with, even if it's a handout that has to do with health data and the politics within, so that our students and member of the movement can have something handy, because you have a lot to share with us. You have a lot in your mind, in your head, and from your wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much, everyone, for making our time to be in class today. I wish you all the best in your endeavor.
I wish all of
Good
you
evening.
all the best. It's thanks you for your kindness. I'm very much looking forward to future cooperation again. Yeah, have a wonderful day and all the best. I'm looking forward to getting connected again. That's it's Afrolongevity is an enormously great endeavor, and I'm it's a great honor for me to support this educational program.
Thank you so much, Prof. I'll keep in touch. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.